Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. I've been really looking forward to our listeners experiencing this conversation that we have with this individual on this episode because it is probably one of the more genuine conversations we've had in recent memory with somebody who's been directly affected for decades in regards to a missing person, especially a missing mother. Before we get to that, Tim, how are you today?
I am doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. Yeah, I think as soon as we spoke with Matt Dale, who is our guest on today's episode, I think we both realized how rare and important sharing this conversation is because he is the son of Granby Girl, otherwise known as Patricia Tucker, who was 28 years old when she went missing, and she was found off of the road in Granby, Massachusetts in 1978, and she has only recently been identified as Patricia Tucker. So for decades, she was a Jane Doe in Massachusetts. Matt now lives in a different state, was not expecting to find out news about his mom's discovery, but you'll hear the journey he went through when he realized what was happening in this conversation.
And the Granby Girl, Patricia Tucker, hit a little bit close to home for us as well because this is Massachusetts. We're both in Massachusetts, and we both work closely with and friends with Lou Berry, who is a police chief in Granby, Massachusetts for a number of years. He wasn't the police chief during the time of Patricia Tucker's murder, but that murder had this residual effect on the town. Even though he came in a little bit later, people were obviously still talking about that. The gravestone marker just said unknown on it. Now it can have a name. So he's just woven into the fabric of the community. So we had a little bit of a personal connection there. And the one thing I really recognize as being a unique opportunity that we're very fortunate to get at this point in this true crime career that we have is the fact that, like we've talked about, Granby Girl had a number of episodes with a number of different people associated with either her identity or the investigation and the family. And now we have the other side of it. And when I say investigation, I'm including Othram, who was responsible for making that determination that Matt was her son, that there is a name for this person. We get to tell through the words of these other people, especially with Matt, who buttons it up, who has it's almost like the epilogue, right? It's like this extended epilogue where we talk to all of these people involved in who this person is, and then she's discovered, and then you have the son who tells everybody what it was like living as a child. He was 5, living as a child into his adolescent years, into his teenage adult years, coming to terms with the fact that his mom's probably not coming back. Why did she leave? Was it intentional? Did she run away? Was she met with foul play? And then he gets all of that information. And I'm telling you, the first time you hear his voice on this interview, you're not going to want to stop listening. I think, Tim, you told me that he had said that he was a man of little words, which I feel like people who say that aren't people of little words. They might be people who don't use extra words. Everything he says here has some meaning to it, has some importance to it. And it is an amazing interview. I can't wait to meet him in person.
Yeah, I think that's what he told me when we spoke. And you can kind of see why. He doesn't join on camera, and he really hasn't done any other interviews with press. So he granted us this interview because I think Lou Berry asked him to. And so he was happy to do it and happy to speak with us. But yeah, everything he shares in this interview is from his recollection or his experience. So it is very interesting and a unique experience for us to speak with him, a man whose life has been affected by tragedy since he was 5 years old. So it is a wild case. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. And he also sent us a poem. And Lance, this was written by Lisa. Lisa was recently on one of our episodes with private investigator Lou Berry, again, former police chief from Granby. And it was just a few weeks ago we spoke with them, and she wrote this poem that Matt forwarded to us, and might as well just read it right here in the intro before we get to the interview. You took a life, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. A mother and father went to their grave, never knowing where their daughter was. Brothers continued the search, and they, too, went to their graves, never knowing where their sister was. Sons grew up, never knowing what happened to their mom. Did they think they weren't good enough since she never returned? Can you even imagine the things that went through their heads? Why did mom abandon me? Why didn't she love me enough? Yet you pulled the trigger, drug her through the woods, and left her. Now I have to ask, how did you lay and close your eyes and go to sleep at night? Do you or did you look over your shoulder everywhere you went? Did or do the images run through your head of what you did to an innocent, loving mom, daughter, and sister? Did or do you ever think of that 5-year-old and what happened to him? Or are you one of those individuals who have no conscience at all? We may never know these answers, but we know that Granby Girl will never be unknown.
It's a great poem, and I just want to give a shout out to Lisa for writing that poem. It does have a bit of natural anger to it, which I really like, because you can't ignore the fact that what happened to Patricia would make anybody angry, including family members. So there's that resolution, but there's always that other undercurrent that needs to come out just so you can have it, just so it can be therapeutic. I just want to give another shout out to Lou and Othram. Obviously, we know what Othram does with their DNA work. Lou Berry, with the help of Private Investigations for the Missing, our nonprofit, Bruce Maitland's nonprofit, and Aaron DeRogers, who does the coordination for that nonprofit, helped to raise the money for the new grave marker. So that money's been raised, and the new grave marker will be placed in Granby at Patricia's resting spot.
And parts of that poem Lisa sort of wrote directly to Gerald Coleman, who is the man suspected of murdering Patricia Tucker back in 1978. And if you have any information about Gerald Coleman or Patricia Tucker, Patricia Coleman, Patricia Dale, or Patricia Heckman, who is all the same person. She was married a few times and had different last names. But Granby, Massachusetts, they're still looking for information. So if you have any information, please call 413-467-9222. And that man, Gerald Coleman, I don't think is spoken about by name in the interview, but he is referred to as asshole, and he is dead. He passed away in prison in 1996.
Now, we've gone on long enough. I'm super excited to have our listeners experience this conversation. But before we get to that, if they want to experience this conversation without the ads, Tim, where would they go?
Our listeners can now subscribe to Missing Premium right there on Apple Podcasts. It's $4.99 a month. You get ad-free episodes, early releases, and our weekly bonus show, which everybody loves. And if you're not an Apple user, you can go to missing.supportingcast.fm and sign up for the same product right there.
And if people wanted to follow Matt Dale on social media, where would they go? Oh, nowhere. He does not have any social media presence, which he reiterates in this episode, kind of comically. But, Tim, we do. And where can people go to find that?
Yes, folks can find us on social media at MissingCSM. Thanks a lot for listening. We're going to cut quick to commercial here, and we'll be right back with Matt Dale. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it. We are being joined now by Matt. Matt, how are you today?
I am fine, sir. How are you?
We are doing fantastic, and it's good to hear that you're fine. I guess I don't even know how to introduce you, so maybe if you could let the listeners know the purpose for you being on this particular episode.
This particular ordeal is it's about my mother, also known as Granby Girl. I guess about 2.5 months ago now or so, we done a DNA test, or I had previously done my DNA trying to find my mother, and the Massachusetts State Police called me and asked me if I would be willing to submit another one. And I said, I don't need to. I've already got it on here. And I sent it to them, and within 3 hours, they had a 100% match saying that it was my mother.
Wow, so that seemed to move pretty quick once you heard from the Mass State Police.
Yes, it was extremely fast. It was almost mind-blowing to me. They had already had Othram standing by waiting on my DNA, actually.
Right, and that was the first time you had heard that Othram was involved in your mom's case?
Yeah, Officer Cahill had let me know that that's who they were using, and honestly, I didn't know who they were. It was pretty much irrelevant. The police were using them, so I figured it was a good company.
Can you take us through, I want to go back a little bit. Can you take us through what it was like when you started to look for your mom?
Didn't quite know what to expect. I didn't know if she was alive or passed on. I have her Social Security number. So I had my sister-in-law, which you have already spoke to. I had her run it. And, of course, there were multiple hits on it. But no physical hits. No person that you could actually talk to. I mean, it was a roller coaster ride for sure then. We've been doing this for a couple of years with really no avail. I guess just what I call ghost hits, where either her Social Security number would pop up, but there was nobody there, or her name would pop up when, again, nobody was there.
How would you be notified of those hits in her Social Security number?
My sister-in-law. She was the one that was taking care of everything for me. We communicated at least weekly about that situation. And then I would tell her to back off a little bit. Let's just wait, let it rest, see what happens. And then we'd go back at it again. I mean, we've done this for a couple of years now. And I'd came to the conclusion several years ago that she had passed on. I felt like if she had still been around, she would have come looking for me. In my eyes, anyhow.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because this is a rare opportunity that we get to speak with someone who has final information about the individual who they might have thought left them. And we've been speaking with a bunch of people who have been in situations like that, or law enforcement, or even representatives from Othram, who have said it's just tough to think about someone like yourself in that position and then having to come to terms with, well, I think my mother probably passed on. And your mother left your life in 1978. Patricia Tucker left your life in 1978. So from that point, how long was it before you came to the determination that she probably didn't abandon you, that she probably had passed on? And can you take us down that path a little bit?
I was probably in my late teens, early 20s. My wife and I had started dating, and of course, she wanted to know about my past, and I never really have talked to it, even to a full extent, up until recently with her. But she'd always asked me about my mother, because I always had her picture, but I never really said a whole lot about it. I just told her that I had been left at an early age, and that approximately about that time that I thought she had passed away. I said, I don't believe, if she was still alive, I don't believe that she would have just forgotten about me, period.
And what do you remember from that time when you were 5?
Quite a bit, actually.
Oh, really?
It's images in your head that you can never forget. You can remember certain things or certain smells or sounds. I thought that the detectives actually thought that I was crazy when I would explain exactly what the house looked like, or a body of water that was extremely close. Even for me at 5 years old, I could walk to it easily. So they didn't quite know how to take all that, but yeah, I can remember everything pretty vivid.
And when you were up here recently, did you go by that old house that you stayed at for a little bit?
No, I did not. Pretty much come up there to do what I had to with the police. I did go by the gravesite, even met with Lou. I know you guys talk to him quite often. He's a great guy.
Yes.
And he and I were the ones that talked about replacing her tombstone and what did I need to do about going about doing it. And of course, the guy that he is, he said, I will take care of it. I'm like, all right, wow, okay then. But no, I didn't have a lot of time to do much of anything. It's a pretty good drive for me up because unfortunately my wife won't fly. But we drove up, kind of going over some things before we had to go to the press conference, just me and my wife. And then the day of the press conference, I got to meet with the DA, the other officers and detectives right before the press conference. And that's when it was like, bam, here it is. I was like, well, okay then.
Right. They gave you a lot of information in that meeting?
In a very short time, yes.
And there's a lot of people out there who don't know where their missing mother, father, brother, sister, they don't know where they are. And they could very well, just through the work that companies like Othram, specifically Othram, is doing, they could very well find out this information in the same time frame that you did. Do you have any advice or maybe some guidance for anybody who has to prepare for something like that? Because I can't imagine where your head goes when you hear this. And I'm thinking about you saying that you could still remember the smells and the fine details of that age. I mean, does all that just come rushing back?
Literally. It's no warning sign to it. When the detectives asked certain questions, I had to go back to that time instantly. So, yeah, there was no warning whatsoever, which I don't want that to discourage anybody else that's trying to find their families. It's well worth it just to know. And for us to sit down and do a whole lot of prayer beforehand, because it'll rattle you like there's no tomorrow. It was very different for me.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It must have been a complete whirlwind.
It was. I mean, I'm not a very emotional person. When it hits you all at once like that, you don't have a choice. You will break down pretty quick, and luckily I've got a good wife and family. They picked me back up.
Yeah, and what was that like being at the press conference, if you don't mind me asking, where everybody is talking about your mom and they're sharing a lot of details about her life?
Out of all honesty, I don't even know what they said. I shut down. I mean, like I said, right directly before that press conference, I was given all the information. They were sliding papers across the table to me. Do you remember this person, that person, so forth and so on? And I was still absorbing that when there's like, all right, press is here. Like, okay, then. So I turned off, basically.
So I don't mean to make light of this, but you're receiving all of this information and they're passing you pictures of people in the sense of, do you recognize this person because they might be a person of interest in your mom's murder? That's what they were doing. And then it was like, let's go to the press. I mean, how did they expect you to react on that? That's how much information can one like human being process in a short period of time?
The person of interest, we already knew who that was. We had talked about that well ahead of time. But the pictures they were sending across the table were people in that circle. If I could remember faces, certain things like that. And I'm like, look, that was 50 years ago. Well, 45 years ago. I said, you're showing me pictures of them now. I need to see them then in order to remember. And the DA understood. Everybody there was working with me real well. So they went online and tried to pull up pictures and stuff like that. And it's virtually impossible when you don't have time to prepare and get everything together. And for me to get my mindset there, it was just hard. I can't say it's going to be easy for anybody else that, Lord willing, they do find their family member. It is what it is. You pray through it and hope for the best.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine the shakeup in your life to learn something about you and your family that you hadn't known for years, like something so big like that had developed for decades.
I mean, you hear stories from different family members. I mean, within 2 years of that, my dad brought me down to where I live now, and it was stopped. He never spoke of it. Nobody. My grandmother, I did go visit her back up in New Jersey a few times after that. She really didn't speak of it because she thought I was too young or whatever the case was, but everybody stopped. It was me that kind of, well, more so my wife's family, my sister-in-laws, that pushed it, trying to say, all right, let's try to take this a step further and figure out what else we can do. So they finally talked me into the DNA test. Knowing that I had all of them behind me helped.
When you took the DNA test, did it take much convincing on their end?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. For myself, I don't have social media or anything like that. I despise it. The only thing that's ever stayed the same about me is I've kept my same phone number since cell phones came out and my same address since my wife and I has been together. And we've been together for 31 years.
And was that purposeful?
Yes. That was just in case I was wrong and she was still alive. Make it a little easier to find me. But social media, that's definitely purposeful because I despise it.
When you were thinking about where she went or anything, did I know you thought that she might have passed at some point, but did you expect her to have been met with foul play?
I didn't think so. But I guess in the back of my mind, remembering the person that of interest, yeah, I guess I could have related to that.
And do you remember him at all?
Yes.
Was he an asshole back then?
Yes. I put the scar above his eye.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How'd you do that?
Can't remember if he was drunk or whatever the case was, but he came in, threw a belt across my back, and instinctively, even at that young age, I was playing with a Lionel train. I come around swinging it. And I busted him open.
Wow.
I bet that was a bit of a surprise to him.
Yeah, I guarantee it. But it was without warning. I mean, it's not like, hey, you're going to get your butt whooped for this. You kind of knew what to expect. This was just random. He come up, cracked my back, and I just reacted.
Why was he motivated to take a belt to your back?
People like that, you don't ever know. I've learned a lot more about him than I knew, obviously, before. There was something that clicked in him that it turned him for the bad anyhow.
Right, so you knew even as a 5-year-old that this was a bad person.
Yes.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And knowing your mother has been identified and her grave marker is going to be changed to properly represent her, on what level does that give you a sense of closure or justice?
Well, obviously, I can never get the justice for her, but the closure, yes. It gives me a great deal of closure.
That's great to hear. How do you feel when you found out that the community of Granby sort of rallied behind, identifying your mom and chipped in for this headstone?
I thought that was pretty awesome. That's why during the press conference, of course, I don't want to speak to those folks. So we did write up something real quick for them and pretty much expressed how we felt about them. They're great people. It's a small community, which is what I live in now. We're a small community. The new headstone, Lord willing, Lou will be able to get this took care of. We did honor the Granby community I had Granby Girl, but under her name. Because that's exactly what she is. I mean, she's been there since 1978. She belongs to that community.
You used the word community a few times there, and the support of the community was important to you. What is the support of the community or a community in general? Because I feel like that's something that is important to you.
It is. Where I live now, the community here is not quite as close as what they are up there, but we are close here. Everybody here knows me because I've been a baseball coach, softball coach, and a shooting instructor for years. And so they all know me. So when they found out through the news and everything like this, everybody was calling me, texting me, "Are you okay? Can we do anything for you?" And that's kind of what reminds me of Granby. They had no idea who this woman was. And I read the news articles from back then. And they kept up with her trying to find any information whatsoever from what I could read up to 2003, I think. To me, that's great. I mean, obviously, I had no idea she was still up there, so I didn't look in that region. But they tried their best to put the information out there, I guess, for the times with what they had.
Do you remember when your mom was, I guess, classified or reported as a missing person?
I was told about it, of course, later in life that they had reported her. Was told that they hired detectives. The detectives handed it over to the FBI for whatever reason. I didn't figure that would go very far, not with an adult anyhow. But right now, the Mass State Police and the Granby Police detectives are still trying to work with the FBI because it's all handwritten stuff, not computerized, and trying to find any kind of more information they could get out of it.
And Tim was telling me that he spoke with you a few nights ago as sort of a pre-interview or just a breaking the ice type of chat. And he said that aside from the press that you did when this all came about, you're not much of a press guy. And I wanted to ask you why you chose to do this particular interview with us and what you see as the importance of this.
The importance of what you guys are doing is, number one, your podcast is called Missing. So this is what I've been dealing with my entire life, basically, is a missing parent. There's thousands of people out here that are missing a child, a sibling, a mother, a father, aunt, uncle, somebody they're trying to reconnect with that they don't know what the situation is. Well, maybe they can learn off of what I did or what happened with me, not necessarily what I did, and actually help themselves. I mean, I want everybody to have closure. Nobody should have to deal with the pain of losing somebody and not ever knowing it. I mean, I know that every scenario is not perfect. You may have a mother or father that doesn't want to deal with you or whatever the case may be, but at least you know. Everybody needs that knowledge to know and make their own decision.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for doing this. Yeah, we really do love to display hope on this show when it's possible, and this is a case that that has a break, and that makes us hopeful for other cases, as you've mentioned. Tell me about that hope, though. In your experience leading up to this point, how much hope did you have?
In the beginning, I had a lot of hope. And then, of course, like I said, when I got into my teens, the hope kind of dwindled. And then throughout the years, I mean, like I said, my sister-in-laws were getting hits, and then they found out to be nothing. And then finally, I come home one day from work, and my local detectives, they pulled in 2 guys that I know. And they said my name, and first thing I said is, "Oh, Lord, what did he do now?" Because I have a child that carries my name. And they said, "No, this time it's you." I was like, "Oh, Lord, what have I done?" And they handed me the Mass State Police's phone number and said, "You need to call these guys." So they left, and I immediately come inside, and I called them. I'm like, "This is Matt Dale." I said, "What can I do for you today?" And he didn't really go into a lot of detail at first, but he was asking me if I had anybody in my family missing. And I said, "Of course, I've got a mother that's been missing my whole life." He said, "Well, would you mind doing a DNA test?" Well, I immediately told him I had already done it under ancestry. He said, "Can you send me the file? Or can you allow me permission to get into it?" I said, "I'll send you the file, and then you guys can do whatever you need to do with it." He said, "Let me get back to you. I'll call you right back." And just a few minutes later, he called me back. He said, "Othram is already waiting. They're going to wait until they get your file, and then I'll be able to get back in touch with you." Well, 3 hours later, like I said, he called me. He said, "I got 100% parent-child match. This is your mother." I was like, "You're kidding." He said, "No, I'm not." He said, "This has been a cold case since 1978. I was like, "Wow. Okay, then." So that's when the flashbacks started happening. And I don't want people to get discouraged just because, yes, it's going to be an emotional rush. You're going to have to go backwards and forwards, and it's just unreal. But people need to know. If they didn't want to know, they wouldn't do their DNA, or they wouldn't ask people questions. They would just let it go. But this has been ongoing for years, and I finally got a answer at least.
I wouldn't worry about people getting I don't want to speak for anybody, but I wouldn't worry about people being discouraged because they hear the range of emotions that you go through when this happens. I think you're a shining example of inspiration, to be honest. You lost your mom at 5 years old. You manage to understand the importance of community and build your family in the way that you did and live your life so that you were prepared to have this moment, whether or not you knew that that was going to happen. It didn't matter. You lived your life in a way where you were ready for it. And then it did become this wash of like, you're going back in time, you're, experiencing all these things again. But I really think that all of the principles and values that you put in place prepared you for this. So I think if nothing else, people, if they're nervous or, I don't know, anxious about getting information similar to yours, I think that they can look at their own life and say, okay, well, what have I done to prepare myself? And I think that's something that you're showing.
I sure hope so. And I hope they don't have to wait 45 years to get an answer.
That's true, yeah.
This day and time, you never know. Technology is great nowadays to an extent, but there's people like me that don't have social media that it's kind of hard to find when you don't have it. I'm not the type of person, I want my name all over the world just because of a click of a computer. People think they can get lucky enough and do it that way. That's fine. I'm not knocking it. That's just not how I wanted to do things. I'm kind of old-fashioned when it comes to that.
Right. And so when you saw the detectives at your house, they gave you the phone number to the Mass State Police, but they didn't tell you what it was in regards to?
No, they had no information whatsoever.
Good for you for calling.
There had to be a reason for it.
Yeah, there had to have been a good reason for it. Did you have, maybe looking back on it now, did you have sort of a inkling or like a subconscious notion that this was about your mom?
Honestly, had no clue. It could go several different ways, but there was no other way of knowing unless I did it. Unless I made that phone call, I wouldn't have known one way or the other. And when these guys, and I've known for years, come up and tell me, hey, you need to call Mass State Police, they're very serious about finding you. They tried to call you, and he did. Officer Cahill did try to call me, and I was at work, so of course I'm not going to answer it. But it was the exact same number that they gave me, so there was something to it for some reason.
Okay, so you had a voicemail from the Mass State Police, and then you saw your local detectives on the same day.
Unfortunately, no, there wasn't a voicemail. It was just a phone number. But there's no such thing as a coincidence. So when you put those two things together, there's a reason. If it's not God slapping you in the back of the head telling you to pay attention, then something's wrong.
Was there any hesitation on your part in making that phone call?
No. As soon as I walked back in the door, I called.
You mentioned you're a parent yourself. How does the identification of your mom change your family dynamic or life with your child?
He was curious. He's always seen the picture. Understand why he looks the way he does too. We're both dark hair, dark complexion, just like she was. He has met her mother, my grandmother. I took him up there, but he was real little. So he doesn't really remember that. But he wanted to come up with me the first time, and I told him that's not a good idea yet. I'm going to try to make it where him, his wife, and my grandson, they can come up with me when we come up the next time. We just have to make sure everything's in line before everybody, all of my wife's family, they want to come up with us. Because like I said, they've been right there the whole time. They would like to come. Of course, my kids want to come. It's just getting everything planned this time a lot better than what I did the first time.
Yeah, I think you could set yourself up to plan in less haste the second time around.
Yeah, most definitely.
Your kid or kids, are they emotional about this identification?
I have a stepdaughter. That's why I keep saying kids. She's not really emotional, of course. She's always known. I've had her since she was 6. My son was more worried about me breaking down than the rest of the situation. He was more worried about his dad. My mom's somebody he never knew, except for what little bit that I've told him. Until recently, now they know everything. He's seen a few a few baby pictures that I've acquired. And then, of course, my baby books that everybody has talked about. But really, he was more worried about just me breaking down.
And what do you say to him, or what do you do to reassure him that you're going to be okay?
I just tell him God's got this. I said, I just pretty much laid it in God's hands.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And those baby books that you mentioned, you've had those for most of your life or your whole life?
Most of it, yes. Still don't know how I acquired them. Makes no sense to me, but I've had all that put in a box for years and years and years with notes and other stuff where I'd done a little bit of research beforehand and never got touched until the detectives called. So now my son's going back through it. My grandson, he wants to see the pictures of me, and my wife's been going through it page for page. I've had a friend of the family that I didn't even know about. She sent some pictures to the police department, to Detective White. Well, then he sent them to me after they got done with them. And my kids really had a ball out of those pictures.
These are all pictures of you as a child?
Yes.
You said it doesn't quite make sense to you. What were you referring to when you said that you had the pictures, but it didn't quite make sense to you?
I couldn't remember and it was the neighbors of where we lived. And I'm not going to say that lake's name because I can't. Lake E is all I could say. They were neighbors of ours, and evidently my mom would take me over there. They had children, play with their kids. They took pictures. Of course, we'd eat over there all the time. Just all kinds of stuff. And I couldn't remember them because that was a good memory. You don't think as much about it as opposed to you have a traumatic happening come on. You're going to remember that. It's stuck in your mind forever. Even now, I still can't get those images out of my head, even though I know where she's at now.
And when we spoke with your sister-in-law, Lisa, she mentioned about the baby books as the way that she knew that your mom didn't abandon you. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, because the books are very well organized. Every doctor's appointment I've ever been to, the slip is in there. I have hair in there. The way that she wrote out the things was very neat, nice, explained everything. Honestly, I've got baby books that I had bought when my kids were little, and I don't think I've ever written anything in them. Not that I don't love my kids, but for me, it's just time. My kids were growing up, I worked constantly. With my baby books, she was very meticulous about how things were written. It was very detailed, very organized. I couldn't imagine sitting down and being able to write a book like that for my kids.
Yeah, it sounds impressive. Speaking from my own personal experience, my first kid definitely has a much more filled baby book than my second. I think that's probably kind of natural for some folks because it is just hard to keep up with. But wow, that's impressive to include all the information about your appointments and things like that too. That must have showed you a lot.
It did. I mean, at first it didn't make sense. I was young. I thought, well, and it's ironic because it only does go up to 5 years old. Just right dead at 5 years old is pretty much when it stops. There's no extra notes like throughout that year or anything. It was shortly after the birthday. I went to the doctor twice, I believe, and the notes are in there for that. And then that was it. So I don't know if she had given the books to my grandmother or what happened. I don't know how it came about that I even acquired them. I don't remember.
This is going to sound like a very strange question, so I'm going to do my best to articulate it. You've mentioned the fact that you've laid this in God's hands and you come across as a spiritual person. Is there a shift in the way, like, do you feel your mom's presence more now, knowing that there's some closure here?
I do. I feel hers and my grandmother's. My grandmother, we were close as long as I could be, which is her mother. But after all this had started up and started going through, I started seeing my grandmother's in my mind, more so saying thank you, that she's proud of me or whatever. Lord, this wasn't just me. This was definitely meant to be. I mean, she could have been under an unknown marker until I die, and nobody would have ever known.
When you think about your life and moving on from this point, are there any ways that you can tell you're going to live differently now?
No, not really. I mean, I'm happier that I know, but as far as changing my life, no, I don't believe so. I believe it's still, I try to leave as much as I can in God's hands. I don't think I've seen this part written in my future, but I'm glad he slapped me in the head for it and let me deal with it.
And will you be coaching baseball this summer?
Actually, my son is doing it now. My son is coaching right now. He's coaching my grandson.
Are you the umpire or something, or are you just on the stands now?
I'm on the stands, and every practice I'm still there. Every game I'm still there. They're playing tournaments right now for the beginning of the season, and I've not missed a practice or a game yet.
Well, Matt, this has been a great conversation. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your story and your mom and your family's story. Is there anything else you'd like to say here today?
Don't give up. Never give up, period. There's always going to be a way. And I'm going to say that right now, for some reason, more so than any other time, the truth is coming to light. So don't be discouraged. God's going to show you